We're going to bring in now our first special guest of the show, who is, he's got to get us those 5R hats. I'm repping Bitcoin today, even though Bitcoin's on a little bit of a dip today, but I'm bullish on Tua, as the title of this episode would say. So if I'm bullish, I'm wearing a Bitcoin hat today. I'm also bullish on the big boss man, who's kicking ass and taking names already this week with his new show, Starting 9, which streams weekday mornings at 9 a.m. here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Good afternoon, Ethan. How are you, sir? You got to unmute, my friend. This is a professional right there.
Oh, professional. You know, you were here yesterday, speaking of professionals, and I'm looking right behind me in my office, and I had about a dozen of these.
Oh, I should have grabbed. Yeah, I had to stop by so quick because I had to rush over to the Hard Rock that I forgot to ask you for a hat.
I got lots of hats. Anybody wants a hat, they come. You know what? Here's the deal: if you bring me lunch and I don't have to pay for Uber Eats, you get a hat. That's how I operate here.
That's how we're gonna do it. I'm gonna bring you some quarterdeck next week.
Actually, I'm heading there at about 1:00. So yeah, you don't have to do that.
That is fantastic. And you know, Ethan, I thought you've done a tremendous job already this week. And I really enjoyed, your conversation with CK on Tuesday about, why Tua gets judged this way, why there's this anti-Tua agenda. I mean, I don't know if you caught what I was saying before I brought you on, but are you expecting what I'm expecting? Because I think Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars, they're all going to have a bad year. I think Trevor's going to struggle this year. He's going to be given every excuse in the book when Tua was not given any excuses last year.
Yeah, I was talking to J-Rod about that today on 5 Reasons to Bet, and he actually kind of likes them over 5.5 for the season. I like them under.
Yeah,
I think they're a 4-13 or 5-12 team this year, and I think you're right, Alex. I do think he's going to be given excuses. I also agree with you that I don't think Urban Meyer is going to last longer than 2 years there. It's not his mentality to kind of stick things out. I wouldn't anticipate he does. But I think there's a lot of factors at play here. But I will say this, even after doing the show the other day and even after tweeting it out and getting people's reasons why it is that Tua is held to a different standard than it seems everybody else, I still really haven't identified the reason. I feel like there are 4 or 5 potential reasons. Some of them I don't give much credence to. He's an Alabama quarterback. I don't think anybody cares about that. I think when, you take some mentioning a race issue, I do think that sort of non-white quarterbacks are held to a different standard typically, but I don't really think that's at play here. People mention the religious angle. I don't know. I mean, Kurt Warner didn't really take a lot of heat for that. Mark Brunell didn't take a lot of heat for that. And they were more in your face.
Right. And Tebow did, but he was like the most in your face.
But he wasn't a quarterback. That's the thing.
He wasn't good. Yeah, it's another
He wasn't good. I mean, but I'm talking about like guys who are good. I don't think Tua throws in anybody's face. I think it's just something that guides him, which is different than we saw maybe even with Kurt Warner, to be honest, who kind of put it out there on a consistent basis. So I don't think it's that. So the only thing I can come back to, and I hate to always keep coming back to this because I know it sounds like a broken record, I just don't think people like Miami. I really think,
good point.
From covering the Heat for all those years and particularly back to the Big Three, there is this kind of weird attitude that the national media, and let's be honest, the national media is basically in 2 places now. That's it. Okay. Look at ESPN Radio's lineup. Everybody there is based in New York. Everybody. Okay. It's either New York or LA. All right. The national media does not represent the rest of the country, and they will cover some Boston. They'll cover some Cowboys, but for the most part, they're really only covering the teams out of that market or that have players, athletes who have profiles big enough to transcend in those markets. They don't like Miami. Okay. They all vacation here. Okay. They're all getting in our way as snowbirds, okay, from December through March, but I don't think they like Miami. We've seen that with the Heat. They felt the Heat that Miami did not deserve a super team in 2010 and on, and ever since, they've discredited everything that the Heat do. I think with the Dolphins were out of sight, out of mind for a long time. Tua had a superstar pedigree in college, and I think that there's just a lot of people who just don't want Miami to succeed. I mean, it sounds like a victim mentality here, but I that's the only one of the reasons that I can really cite here. And I see it running a network that promotes Miami stuff, including your Canes pod.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and let me ask you, like, to get really down to the psychological nitty gritty here, like, what is it about Miami? Is it just jealousy that we get to live in this sort of a climate? Is it because one thing that I kind of wonder about, Ethan, is because you talk about everybody vacationing here and the snowbirds.
Mm-hmm.
I just think they don't respect the fact that there are locals here, because I
Right.
sometimes feel that way about Vegas, right? Because, like, you know, every now and then I get out to Vegas and then, like, you forget there's people that are actually from here. Like, when there are Vegas sports teams, like, I actually know people who live there all
Alex
their
is
life.
one of the fastest growing markets in the country. I mean, the suburbs of Vegas are you know, got incredibly populated over 10 years. I do think it's some of that. I fought this a lot when LeBron left Cleveland for Miami. Okay. This perception that everything in Miami is South Beach and that the real hardworking people are in Ohio. I will say there is a racial bias to that. There's no doubt in my mind. Okay. And I experienced that because, again, I covered the Heat for 4 years during the Big Three after LeBron came down, when we were defending LeBron against the rest of the country, but particularly people in Cleveland. And then I was the poor sap who got sent up to Cleveland by Bleacher Report in 2014 because I had a clause in my contract that said I'd be Miami based. And they said, well, you're the LeBron writer, though. That doesn't keep you out of a hotel in Cleveland. And so I spent 138 nights covering the Cavaliers. Okay, not all of them in Cleveland, thank God, but some of them in Detroit and Indiana.
Almost worse.
Right. And I will say this from having, spent a lot of time in restaurants and bars up there and there is a perception that people who work hard look a certain way and they live in a certain place. And I don't think that people recognize that when you go 5 steps from the arena, okay, in Miami, you're in some areas where people are working 3 jobs just to survive. They don't view Miami that way. That's not the national perception. It's the same thing as whenever they do a flyover and they show South Beach, when actually the Dolphins and the Canes are playing across from a Walmart, okay, and a racetrack gas station. They just assume everybody's out in bikinis. We know that that's part of this area. Okay, I live 2 miles from the beach, on Las Olas, but it's not this entire area. And so I do think that's a lot of it. I think with Tua, part of it is this need to be right. There are a lot of people who took a certain stance on Tua that never made sense. How are you going to judge a guy, okay, coming off major surgery, the type of surgery that would debilitate pretty much any athlete, but particularly one playing that position?
Yeah.
You're judging him on that with no preseason games last year, a shortened training camp, an offensive coordinator from the 50s, and I mean the 1850s, and and no weapons. He had no weapons, okay? I mean, he had Gesicki, he had Parker, but, Preston Williams, he started to trust, and he got hurt again because Christian Wilkins jumped on him. They didn't have enough players around him. Now they built an offense that suits him. They have coordinators who believe in him, and he's had time to heal and actually have a real offseason with real preseason games. And I think he's going to be terrific. Doesn't mean every game is going to be great, but I do think that you're looking at a guy who could be a Russell Wilson-like quarterback in the NFL. And if you look at Russell Wilson's first year, he won some games like Tua did. He averaged about 5 yards per completion or attempt. Yeah. I mean, he was averaging 130 yards a game. They didn't take sort of the ropes off of him either and let him play until later in his career.
Yeah, I want to shifting to some Heat. I want to compliment you and the 5 on the Floor crew. Awesome interview with Max Strus. And when I found out that was going up and that was happening, I felt like a kid on Christmas. Like I fell in love with the Summer League dudes. Like I fell in love and Strus, I started to fall in love with him last year, but Omer Yurtseven, Strus, Garrett, Giroux, who we unfortunately lost to Indiana. Like I fell in love with these guys. So that Strus interview was awesome. And I already see, like, Ethan, the revelation that's making the rounds on all the sports blogs was, and I'm totally the same way. The few times I've been around Pat Riley, him admitting that, he was afraid of Pat Riley. I mean, was that surprising to hear that? Because it wasn't surprising to me.
Well, you got to understand. I mean, I'm old and you're old, but Pat's older. And so when you look at a lot of these young players, like, what Riley represents is different than what he did before. I mean, most people don't remember. I mean, the players coming up now don't remember him from Showtime. They weren't born. Right. They hardly remember him from the Knicks. They just remember him kind of putting the big three together. There's sort of a different type of aura to it. I think Max fits here. Like, you could just tell that he's one of those guys who buys into what they do, buys into the work. And let's just be honest, he's going to have to, because as much as I like their offseason, they put a lot of eggs in some kind of questionable baskets in terms of proven track records, right? I mean, they've got, they're expecting Strus and Vincent to play prominent roles off the bench a year removed from being two-way guys. They don't really have a lot of options there. Like you mentioned, the other two-way guys. I mean, if they sign Garrett, I mean, you're talking about another guy doesn't really have much experience. The roster is very heavy on age and also on inexperience, not necessarily youth. They've got some guys in their mid-20s, but who have not played a lot, okay, whether it's Omer or Strus or Vincent. And so what you kind of have is, when you have the guys at the top level, okay, well, you have older guys, you run the risk of injuries. Mm-hmm. And then when you have younger guys or inexperienced, you run the inexperienced guys, you run the risk of inconsistency. That's my concern with this Heat team. I think they're going to be a really tough out in the playoffs. I think they're built for the playoffs. You know what their 9-man rotation is going to be, okay? Eric's going to roll it out, or 8-man rotation. My question is, can they get to the playoffs healthy and in the right seed? They don't have a ton of depth on this roster. They've got a dead roster spot. I hate to say it, with KZ Okpala. They've got a dead roster spot, which is their 15th spot, which they're not going to use because they don't want to go over the tax. They have a dead roster spot with UD in terms of playing, even though I can tell you there are some in the organization who want Eric to actually use him this year, and I agree with them. I think there's no reason you can't roll out UD at the end of a quarter or at the end of a long road trip or at the end of a blowout and just let him set screens and rebound and save some other guys, because they got to get Lowry, Butler, Tucker, Markieff Morris to the playoffs. If they get them to the playoffs healthy, I think they're a tough out.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about UD, and you would know better than me, but the impression that I get on Udonis, who obviously he's very polarizing. He takes a lot of criticism. Then there are people like me who would take a bullet for the guy. But tell me if my impression is correct, that UD people have a problem with him taking up a roster spot, even though he's barely an NBA player at this point. But he approaches every practice, Ethan, as if he was preparing to play 48 minutes. Like, I think that's the thing people don't understand about UD is, even though you may not consider, I don't mean you specifically, but I'm talking to the collective you may not consider him to be a real NBA player, but he practices every day as if he was ready to be a starter.
Well, that's what Strus was. I mean, Strus said basically his pregame workouts are Jimmy and UD and poor Max. I'll say this, Jimmy, I was told this last year, before every game, the last person that Jimmy speaks to is Udonis Haslem. Okay. That is how that has worked. And I have no issue with Udonis taking the roster spot. There is a difference in terms of being a coach and being a player. When you're a coach, there's a separation. There's a feeling you're aligned with the coaches. When you're a player, you're aligned with the players. It's easier for him to communicate and to be in those gatherings with them. Doesn't mean he's a spy or anything. UD's the last thing from a narc. Okay, but he's in it with them. That's a different circumstance, Alex. And I think so. I do think I think the roster spot is deserved. The problem for them is that they don't have Oladipo for a few months. They don't have a functioning KZ Okpala, okay? And they're not using the 15th spot. Otherwise, I wouldn't care about the UD spot, okay? He can have it for as long as he wants, but they've left themselves thin because of those others. Now, I'm hearing Victor could be back a little earlier. That would help a lot, okay? And then if they can get anything out of KZ or flip him for something, then that changes the equation. But I don't have an issue with UD. UD is not the problem. The problem is they're trying to stay under the tax. That's the problem.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Great stuff here from Ethan Skolnick. Ethan, let the people know, by the way, because you've launched Starting 9 this week, and it's off to a great success. what you have planned on the next episode and how people can hop in and watch and live chat, listen, all that good stuff.
Well, thanks, dude. I'm going to continue to host 5 on the Floor. We got a new episode coming up tonight. So that's the Heat Pod. You can tell my voice has been like this for 10 days. So I'm hoping it's better by tonight. But then also Starting 9 is going to be every Tuesday and Wednesday at 9 a.m. The 2 days I don't have to drop my daughter at school. Nice. So it'll be Tuesday and Wednesdays at 9 a.m. I think next week we're going to have Josh Moser, who I do some work with at Channel 7. He's the new anchor over there at WSVN, and then my guy Joe Goodman, who I used to cover the Heat with, who covers Alabama. He's got a new book out on last year's Alabama season, but of course Alabama's playing Miami, so we'll have some fun with Joe next week. I'll probably end up telling Big 3 stories the whole time because Joe is my road partner. But so it'll be every Tuesday and Wednesday, and then we did make another announcement today. We want to upgrade our Marlins coverage throughout the network, so we brought in Joe Frisaro.
That's so good, I love it.
Who runs Man on Second, which is not just the Marlins, but it's baseball throughout the state at all levels and also beyond. So we're going to start building that out as well.
I love it. Ethan J. Skolnick. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. Check out the sports tweets at 5 Reasons Sports, and then Ethan J. Skolnick for some sports tweets and all the other.
Yeah, not so many. Not so many. I'm going to Quarter Deck, by the way. So I see right above.
Awesome.
Chanel's out of town, but that's okay. I still go. I still go to Quarter Deck. This is true. We have more. You know what? That's kind of sad, but it's true. Were there 500 people in the crowd last night?
Since I didn't watch, I couldn't tell you. I actually the only game I watched yesterday was the first end of the Cubs Rockies doubleheader because I bet it. Like I've been betting against the Cubs and winning money because they're they traded their whole team, but they did lose yesterday, the game that I bet. So that was the only game I watched yesterday.
Go to Bet US. You got to use one of the 2 codes, either mine or yours. That's how that works. Yeah, I mean Cabrera's first start, it was worth watching, but they looked like there were 12 people there. So that's
sad.
That's unfortunate. Alex, thank you. I'm going to have a dragon roll.